1, 2, 1, 2.
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
Hi, Peter. Yeah. How do I share my screen, please?
Your screen is shared.
Okay.
I could see it. Okay, and I can hear you.
It's the PowerPoint I want to share. So,
okay.
How do I choose the PowerPoint that I want?
Okay. So, good question. Have you not got a share screen button?
What's the icon for that?
So, well, I've got. Hang on a second. I'm going to switch Pip off FaceTime because you're echoing on me, Pip. Okay. On the bottom of mine, I've got a screen with a red line through it.
Yeah, I haven't got that available to me.
Okay. Did you click on share screen and audio or whatever it was? Share video and audio?
I did, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, That's weird. Okay, yeah. So that when I click on that button, it says window or screen, select window or screen. So
I've just got three icons: the settings, the mic, and the camera. I've got moderation panel.
Okay. When you click on settings,
yeah,
do you have something that says apply?
Yeah. I'll click apply. Okay.
Apply,
I did do that, but I'll apply it anyway.
I'm sure you did. Yeah. Like me, you clicked everything. I'm sure. Okay. What I should. Okay.
Right. I think I might have it here.
All right. That's good.
Are we in?
Yep.
Okay, folks. Welcome along. This session is focused upon a guide to opening a successful secondary school nurture group. My name's David Colley. I'm an associate at the Oxford Brookes University, where I led the National Senko training for 5 years. I'm working closely with the Mulberry Bush organisation on a number of research projects. And the research around secondary school nurture groups has just been completed in conjunction with Dr. Ruth Seymour, who will be speaking on the pyramid stage in a few moments' time. I feel like I'm in the dance tent. Ruth's on the pyramid stage, but we have worked together for 2 years on this research project, where we drew together the views and experiences of secondary school nurture group staff and advisors. And the paper which I'll be referring to will be published next month in the International Journal for Nurture in Education, and that will be free to download. So when I talk through the practical steps to opening a successful nurture group, I'm actually taking you through a key part of that paper, the appendices, in fact. So that's something that you will be want to download for free in July, if this is of any interest to you. So if we think about the objectives for this session, there may be many head teachers who are very familiar with nurture groups and the theory and practice of it, but there equally might be colleagues for whom this is quite a new concept in terms of the principles of nurture, etc. So I will give a brief overview of nurture groups by way of introduction. We will be looking at the 6 principles of nurture, which is really information about the classic nurture group model, which is what I will be discussing today with you. And the 6 principles underpin the classic model because, as we'll see, there are a number of examples of variants, which is to say nurture groups by name, but not by practice. And we have to be very careful that we look for the gold standard in nurture group practice when we set out to invest in this kind of support for social, emotional, and mental health needs. As part of the session, I am going to look at the weaknesses in nurture group practice in a secondary school setting, and then draw your attention to some of the evidence that there is about how secondary school nurture groups can support particular students who are really struggling and actually will fall through the gap if we don't put in place structured support that focuses on their individual needs. I will be turning to the guide to opening a successful secondary school nurture group, but a key message for you as head teachers in secondary schools in Oxfordshire is that the successful nurture group must be embedded in a whole school ethos that is nurturing. And there is a massive responsibility on you as the senior leader and your team of senior leaders to really get on board with the philosophy of nurture and nurturing schools before the nurture group opens. The nurture group has to be one aspect of a nurturing whole school practice, and we'll be looking at that idea also. Just for your reference, the International Journal of Nurturing Education, there's a link there for you. Volume 7 will be available to download in July. And the research itself was conducted in 2018. But as I say, bringing together the views of professionals in the field about what works in secondary school nurture groups and what the challenges are too. So I hope that looks okay for these objectives. You know, we only have 40 minutes or so, so you'll appreciate that some of the detail, it'll be very much an overview of secondary school nurture group practice. So if we think about the motivation for nurture groups and how the idea evolved, it's clear to say that nurture groups evolved in early years settings and primary schools. And the reason we're talking about secondary school nurture groups is that they work. They really do have an impact on the social, emotional functioning of children and young people. And because they worked in primary schools, secondary schools looked at the model and started to explore nurture groups in their setting for older children. And they found that nurture groups in secondary schools also work when they're set up properly, when the principles of nurture are applied, and particularly where the whole school is a nurturing environment for all students, and the nurture group is an additional support for those who need it particularly. So very much a primary start or beginning in the primary setting, and developed by a particular individual, Marjorie Boxall, who you may be familiar with, working in the 60s and 70s, and recognizing that a lot of children were being labeled as maladjusted at a young age and sent to specialist provision, when in fact all that was required was for schools to understand that their behavior was a communication of not yet having the emotional skills or the social skills to meet the expectations of the school classroom. So the nurture group was a discrete classroom within a school that gave these children time to catch up and to catch up on missed learning experiences. So Boxall and Benathan were leaders in terms of the theory and practice of nurture groups in primary schools. As we'll see, nurture groups are very influenced by psychology and the work of John Bowlby in particular, and attachment theory. The importance of an attachment figure and an attachment space that is safe. And that if children do not feel safe, then this will be communicated in a whole range of ways. And we can think about our own students in secondary schools, that sometimes the behavior is communicating that there's a sense that they're feeling unsafe in the situation in which we are teaching them. So safety and creating a sense of safety is a big driver for nurture group intervention. And to develop safety, the nurture group has two members of staff in the room. The nurture group has small numbers of students. There might only be 10 students with 2 staff. The routine of the nurture group is slow moving. The environment is welcoming and calm. There's a bridge between the home and school. And crucially, there's a focus on relationships and maintaining great relationships between teachers and the students, repairing relationships, not giving up on children whose behavior has been completely unacceptable. And as a teacher myself, I've worked in secondary schools and nurture group practice for many years. And I understand we must set clear boundaries for behavior. And one of my colleagues on another session is talking about behavior management, and that nurture groups are very firm about the behavior and the expectations for children and young people. But equally, we've got to try and understand what is driving the behavior that is so offensive or disruptive or challenging. And this is the philosophy of nurture groups. Nurture groups are on early intervention. It's very much about supporting young people early so that their life and their time in school doesn't spiral into crisis. It's trying to support and nurture, which of course by definition means to care and protect young people while they are growing, while they are developing. So it's an early intervention, and a number of secondary schools are focusing on year 7 children who have transitioned from primary school, who need extra support in that first term, that first 2 terms, to find their feet in this new environment. And a key message about nurture groups as an introduction is that these are part-time interventions. The students spend most of their time in mainstream classes, but for 2 or 3 sessions a week, they will come and join these trained staff in the nurture room, where they have a slow-moving environment that is predictable, where staff can really focus on how the children are feeling, how they are meeting the challenges of the secondary school, and sending them off with confidence about the next lesson that they are going to be attending in mainstream. Not only are they part-time in the week, they are time limited, 3 terms maximum. Students might be supported by the nurture group for only 2 terms, but that gets them on track, and that preempts them becoming a major behavioral problem for you in year 9 or in year 10. So you can see there's different cohorts of students can be supported by the nurture group at different points in the day and different points in the week. And of course, some secondary school head teachers run a key stage 3 nurture group, and some a key stage 4, and you can have different sessions at different parts of the week to give students in your school specific professional support to keep them engaged and keep them feeling like they belong to your community. So as an introduction then, nurture groups began in primary schools, very much led by educational professionals. Secondary seen their impact in primary and are exploring the idea of nurture groups and nurturing practices as a whole school project too. Because of the time, I'm not going to dwell in great detail on the 6 principles of nurture, but it's very important that you as head teachers are aware that there are 6 principles that drive gold standard practice. The first relates to understanding that learning, because nurture groups are very focused on learning. It's all about helping the children become better learners, regulating their emotions so they can engage with learning. But the nurture group understands that your 14-year-old student in year 9 is emotionally functioning at a much younger age. And this explains the immature behavior, the challenges in the classroom, the problems on the corridor. And we can deal with those with sanctions. The nurture group is trying to understand what is missing in that child's emotional development at a developmental level. We will take that 14-year-old back to activities and language and opportunities to express themselves as an 8-year-old, if that's what is required to help them learn about sharing, about responsibility, about social skills on a whole range of levels, depending on what skill they are missing. And we assess which skills they are missing with a particular tool, which we'll come to. So children's learning is understood developmentally. We've alluded to the safe base, and a key principle is that the classroom is a safe base for that year 9 cohort. And we endeavour to do that with the nurture group. And the nurturing school identifies that the whole community needs to feel safe, and head teachers put in place a whole range of training and activities and spaces that promote safety and well-being. Moving through the principles, and I won't go through them all this morning, we've got nurture and its importance for the well-being of children and young people. And we've already alluded to this in this conference with earlier presentations. Language as a means of communication. So the nurture group really promotes language activities to help students express verbally how they're feeling, so that the physical or behavioral outbursts start to become managed, because the staff are teaching the young people how to manage their emotions, to name them, to recognize when anger is welling up, and to explore different ways of managing that anger. So the nurture group is working very closely with emotional regulation, emotion coaching, emotional understanding. All behavior is communication, a key principle there, which we've already alluded to, and the importance of transitions, not just from year 6 to year 7, but perhaps from key stage 3 to key stage 4, perhaps from the nurture room into the playground or into the dining hall. Transitions are big issues for children who are already fragile, likely to lose their emotional control with very little challenge or with very little provocation from the situation. So what I'm saying to you clearly is that the 6 principles of nurture, which you can access at Nurture UK, which is a leading charity around nurture group training, understanding the 6 principles is going to be a key feature of setting up a successful nurture group in your school. We talked about Bowlby, and there's no question that attachment theory has informed nurture group practice, and this idea of staff recognizing that students have different attachment styles. The majority of your students may be securely attached, and that impacts on their view of themselves, but also their expectations of others. But there'll be a significant minority of your young people with insecure attachment styles. And this might be an ambivalent insecure attachment style, or it might be an attachment style that is avoidant. And staff need to be aware that there are different attachment styles which require us as professionals to respond in different ways to these young people. And lots of staff in secondary schools aren't aware that this is a feature of how young people are developing. And whole school training around attachment theory is central to planning for and developing a successful nurture group and successful whole school practices. So it's this focus on relationships and attuning to the young people as they approach you in the morning, as you enter the classroom. Are we attuning to how the cohort is feeling, how individuals are? Because this is central to nurturing practices. The nurture group has clear routines and high expectations and manages behavior and will not accept hurtful, harmful behavior. But it is always trying to understand what is driving this and how can we deal with what's driving it. So very much a philosophy, very much a whole school ethos. We talked earlier about young people who have some missed learning experiences. They're lacking particular emotional skills or social skills. Well, how do we identify that? The Boxall profile for young people is an assessment instrument which identifies strengths for a young person in terms of their functioning in the classroom, but also barriers to their learning. And by completing a Boxall profile assessment on a young person or a group of young people, we can find out where our targets for their emotional development should be focused. And the nurture group will make the assessment through the Boxall profile, set different targets for different students within the group, but then use that term or two terms to really try and build those skills for the young people in the nurture group so that they can then use those new skills in the mainstream classroom and engage and be positive and feel like they belong. So the Boxall profile for young people is for the secondary age. It's an assessment tool which you might be interested in looking into further. I think it's important that we look at the challenges and the weaknesses in secondary school nurture groups, and also the evidence, the impact of how they might impact your school data and the experience of young people as well. In the secondary school, it's a much bigger community, of course, than the primary, and you might be working with 1,000 students. And the question then is, well, what's the point of just working with 10? What about the other 990? But actually, this is why the whole school approach to nurture is so important. The nurturing school that uses the 6 principles of nurture across the whole school and its understanding of children and young people. It's focused on attunement. It's a focus on attachment and relationships. That the nurture group working with 10 or 20 children in the week in 2 different cohorts has a chance to focus on those who are most vulnerable or most likely to drop out of the school community. So that small capacity means it's quite intensive work for you, and it fits into a much broader set of support structures that your school develops alongside the nurture group. We've got the cost issue, paying 2 salaries for small groups of children, might be an issue that crops up. How do you timetable 10 year 7s coming into the nurture group when their timetables are very different? Which subjects do you say that children are not going to go to so that they go to the nurture group? This can be challenging for staff and for mainstream staff, particularly if you haven't done the work to make clear to mainstream staff what this project is all about. So it's very important before the nurture group opens that your mainstream staff are fully conversant with and understand what this nurturing project is all about community, about relationships, about attunement. And that will reduce the difficulties that mainstream staff might pose about an individual not attending their lesson. But there are some philosophical challenges about nurture groups, because essentially you're taking 10 children out of mainstream and identifying them as different or in need. And critics of nurture groups will say, you've said that young person is in deficit emotionally. They've got something missing. You've labeled them as being in deficit or vulnerable. And, is that inclusive? Is that ethical? So these are the issues one needs to consider. Also got the implications if parents aren't given a clear overview of nurturing practices and why your school is going down this path. Are you criticizing their parenting? Are you saying that their child is insecurely attached? What does that mean? What did I do wrong? So the way in which the nurture group and the philosophy of nurture is presented to the school community by the senior leaders, by you as a head teacher and your team, is going to be very important in how a referral to nurture is going to be received by parents and carers. Isolation refers to the nurture group becoming a bit of an adjunct in some cases. If it's not embedded in the whole school, nurture groups can become isolated. They can become a dumping ground for badly behaved year nines. And mainstream staff might be glad to get rid of certain individuals, and we have to avoid that at all costs. The school must understand what the nurture group is. The school must understand that this nurture group cohort needs a balance, and that you'll have students who are very withdrawn. You will not have 10 students who are all kicking off, because that will fail. There's a balance in the nurture group, and mainstream staff understand that students are attending to help them with their emotional development, their sense of belonging and community in the school. Paul Cooper has done a lot of research on nurture groups, and his paper with Whitebread identified that the classic nurture group is surrounded by nurture group variants, which means schools claiming to have a nurture group but not following the nurture group principles, claiming to have a nurture group and just dumping kids in there, closing the door and forgetting about those young people. That is not what we're interested in setting up. We want the gold standard, we want best practice, and we'll be moving on now or shortly to what that would look like. A document that I'd like to highlight for you is Education Scotland's Towards a Nurturing City. And their work has produced an excellent document. And the document's called Applying Nurture as a Whole School Approach. And it's a comprehensive document about how a nurturing school can be developed, and I'll be able to share that with you. If you email me after this presentation, I can send you that document along with the slides if that would be helpful. But in terms of Education Scotland, Scotland's been working with nurture and nurturing practices for probably 20 years now. And Glasgow as a city has seen a massive impact on school exclusion through nurturing practices in schools. They've seen staff attendance rise significantly in that same period. Some of my earlier research supported the way in which secondary school nurture groups promote social emotional functioning for young people, support the transition of year 6 into year 7 successfully, and offer an environment, a professional environment, where young people who might be in year 9 or year 10 who have struggled with a number of mental health conditions resulting in their refusal to come to school. The nurture group offered a perfect environment for those individual students to come into school, into a safe place, into a warm and welcoming place for a number of sessions each week, and then build up their time on the school site before returning to mainstream. And that was cited very clearly in my earlier research. For more recent examples of secondary school nurture groups, Giapella in 2015 did some comprehensive work on a part-time secondary school nurture group, and it confirmed the improvements in social emotional functioning and in learning and attainment. And the reading list at the end of this presentation cites a number of other papers in relation to secondary school nurture groups and their impact. So just in the last 10 minutes, if I can relate to you some of the features of the research that Ruth Seymour and I undertook, and which will be published next month. This research project really focused on a number of focus group interviews with 28 professionals who were practicing secondary school teachers or teaching assistants or advisors on nurture, all of whom had experience of secondary school nurture groups. And we used the focus groups to develop current best practice for setting up a secondary school nurture group. And the full paper is available to you next month, but I'll be taking you through the appendix about which sets out almost like an agenda for a staff meeting, almost like a checklist for you as secondary heads about the prerequisites before a nurture group opens. What do you need to have in place as a senior leadership team before the nurture group opens? When the nurture group does open, what are the operational features of that in a secondary school? And anticipating challenges, what can you prepare for in potential challenges for you if you decide to embark on this whole school project around promoting nurturing practices in your school? So if I take you through these, and then I'll be able to field any questions. At the moment, I can't see the chat room, so I'm sorry if things are in the chat room, and I could well be talking to myself. I have no idea if there's anyone here in the dance tent. So happy to take any questions when we've been through this session. And again, if you email me, I can send you the slides and the Applying Nurture as a Whole School Approach document that Glasgow is. So what do you need to have in place before you even open a nurture group? Well, you've got to be on board. That's the first thing. You and your team. You've got to be comfortable with the idea of nurturing young people and creating a nurturing ethos. You've got to be ready to drive this and have a senior leadership team who are really excited about this, developing this approach. And basically, if you're not, don't do it. There's lots of other things you can do, and I'm sure you're already doing really well. But without the drive and the eye of the head teacher on the project, it won't get embedded and it will not develop in the way that we all hope. You might want to identify a nurture champion, someone on the SLT who is going to be the leader, who is going to report to your staff meetings and your SLT meetings on a regular basis. So let's get it in your development plan and let's get the budget, because there are going to be cost implications for the staffing, for the resources in the nurture room. You're going to have to find a space and you're going to have to make it look great so that the children are coming into a very positive space. And then there are ongoing costs around the nurture breakfast and other resources, probably on an annual basis. Do consult with the Applying Nurture as a Whole School approach. Get your teeth into that. See how far advanced Glasgow and Scotland are in terms of nurturing practices and how wedded they are to this approach. And then give yourself 6 months to set this up properly. From the moment you decide you and your SLT want to do this, let's have a 6-month run-in where training can take place, where staff meetings and discussions around the 6 principles, where you can appoint and recruit your nurture team and have them trained appropriately. A 6-month period running up to this project beginning. In that 6 months, you want to find a nurture room. That's an appropriate safe space and where it's going to be located. Identify the funding. Pupil premium is often a resource that is invested into nurture group support, if that's an option for you. Furnish it. Provide a budget for your nurture staff so that they have kind of petty cash that they can use to buy consumables for the nurture breakfast. You've got to get your nurture team right. could be a teacher and a TA, but they need to have nurture training, which is provided by a number of providers, Nurture UK, Nurture International. Nurture UK run the National Nurturing Schools programme, and for senior leaders to support the whole school approach to nurture. And so it's highly recommended that 2 senior members of staff join the Nurturing Schools programme, and the nurture team join the theory and practice training programme. Again, investment, funding's required, but we're after the gold standard here. This next point's really important. The whole staff training needs to be planned over that 6 months, and we'll have in-service training around the 6 principles of nurture, attachment theory and attachment-informed practice, Vauxhall profile assessments, what they are, what they look like, because your mainstream staff will be asked at times to contribute to those assessments, and they'll be asked to monitor the targets. So they need to have that understanding of the Vauxhall profile before the nurture group opens. You might want to look at a whole school readiness audit, which you will find in the document Applying Nurture as a Whole School Approach. And you may want to speak with parents and carers about the project, about the development of this nurturing ethos in your school, so that everybody understands the principles of nurture and what this new nurture group thing is going to be and how it's going to function and what the purpose is. So let's be clear about that from the outset. And then we need to have a referral system, which means that the nurture team don't have young people dumped on them without a plan or without preparation. We need a coherent system of referral for young people so that they can prepare for joining the nurture group in the spring term, for example, and that the staff can prepare. What's really important is that we have the right mix within the nurture group. And sometimes the balance of the nurture group will preclude a particular young person joining the nurture group at that time. So we have to have that balance also. When you've done that 6-month prep, let's have a celebration about it. Let's get the nurture group open. Let's get the local press down. Let's get it on the website. Let's make the nurture group very much part of the school's offer for social, emotional, and mental health. And in response to the pandemic in particular, trying to be compassionate and sensitive about the needs of the children at this time. But one of the other features we'll be alluding to is the well-being of you and your staff team also. And we need to be thinking about how we support our staff and the supervision of staff such as nurture group teams who are working doing a lot of emotional work, as John Reed alluded to earlier. We need to take that emotional work seriously and build in structures that support our staff who are engaged with this, to acknowledge the emotional work that's being undertaken. So they're the prerequisites. In terms of the operational features, you might want to look at a particular year group because year 6 is coming into year 7 might be the focus for you, but you might have a particularly problematic cohort in year 9, for example. And it might be there that you go straight away because actually you've got, as a school, you've got lots of support in year 7 already. So there's flexibility about the focus for you. But I think looking at cohorts of a particular year group is a sensible way forward. Think about the dynamics of the 10 students you will be putting together, and feedback from the research recommended that you have some pilot sessions where you see whether those 10 would work well together for a session or two, and you might change the dynamic before you confirm how that particular nurture group is going to move forward over the next 2 terms, before you commit, I guess, to the balance of the groups. The nurture group will use the Vauxhall profile and focus on those emotional and social needs of the group, talking candidly about emotional responses and how to regulate strong emotions at times, and to develop their confidence and their ability and their self-belief that they can cope and that they have something to offer and what they say is worth listening to. There's a lot of social interaction in the nurture group where young people who might be reticent about talking about their experiences at the weekend or talking about their hobbies, they have a very structured environment in which they can explore talking without interruption for 3 minutes and making the group laugh, or getting some feedback about who they are and how they are. These are very profound experiences for children and young people, and we mustn't assume that everyone's had them. So there's some young people who have not had that, and the nurture group can provide that experience, and from that experience the young people can grow from there. What I've seen in nurture group practice is that once a young person starts to make progress in an area that you've targeted, things start to really roll, and lots of skills start to develop, and lots of things fit into place at last. And suddenly they're ready. You know, a couple of terms in, they are ready. And the best thing that can happen is when you get ignored as the nurture teacher, because they're now in year 10, they don't need you. Actually, they've never come back to the nurture group, and that was all a part of the past. So getting ignored, you know, it's a plus, and it does happen to me. Okay, so we've talked about the length of time. I'm running a bit short of time here, so make sure the nurture group is a high profile and the nurture group activities are celebrated. And as senior leaders and head teachers, you really must try and protect the nurture team so that they're not pulled out to cover for a French lesson because you're really struggling with staff. You're going to have to ring fence their role and their work and make that clear from the outset. So let me just move on to the challenges now. And really, these are often to do with schools that have maybe rushed into setting up the nurture group or haven't quite got that preparation right. The first one, though, is about, this timetabling issue. Are you going to be courageous and saying, no matter what lesson that individual child has in a subject area, they are going to nurture them because that is the priority for them? Are you going to be saying that students cannot come out of English, maths and science? Are you going to be looking for particular subject areas to withdraw these students and creating the timetable around that? These are decisions that these are challenges that you need to anticipate. If you haven't got the mainstream whole school on board with the nurture group and nurturing practices, there's going to be some misunderstandings that bubble up. There's going to be some misunderstandings about children going to nurture and why. There's going to be some mistrust potentially developing about what these nurture teachers are doing or what a Boxall profile is. So you've got to interlink it with your pastoral system, with your counselling team, with your youth workers or your family support workers. And we've got to communicate carefully with parents and carers in mainstream so that if they are approached for their permission for their child to join a nurture session, they're not offended by that, or they don't feel there's a stigma. The nurture group is part of the support that your school has embedded. It's just another type of support, dyslexia support, counselling, any other kind of special need support that you have in place. The nurture group is seen as an extension of that. Nurture staff may be absent, so why not have someone who's already trained in nurture who could slot in, knows the young people, and avoid that disruption of the nurture group because of absence. And you need to give it time to make an impact. If you are looking at data, which we must, and we must look carefully at the evidence around the impact of nurture groups. give it time to bed in, and keep an eye on through possibly a case studies of individual students, how the nurture group has impacted on their engagement, their attainment, the number of incidents that they've been involved in, and keep data for Ofsted and parents and others and trustees about the kind of impact the nurture group has had for you as a school. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. It's 22, I think. So if there's anyone in the room, and I have no idea if there is, thank you for joining, and happy to field any questions if you have any. If we have time, I'm not sure.